Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Stars Like Us. I'm your host, Aliza Kelly, and it is an extraordinary honor to welcome today's guest onto the show. This is the one and only Steven Forrest, astrologer, Capricorn Sun, Aries Moon, Scorpio Rising. Steven Forrest is the author of a dozen astrological bestsellers, including the classic, The Inner Sky. His work has been translated into many languages. Over the years, he has traveled worldwide teaching his brand of choice-centered evolutionary astrology, an astrology which integrates free will, grounded humanistic psychology, and ancient metaphysics. Currently, he leads an online school, the Forrest Center for Evolutionary Astrology. Steven, thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Aliza.
So I would love to just kick off our episode with you introducing our listeners to evolutionary astrology. Stars Like Us I'm an astrologer myself, so I would imagine our listeners, we don't need to describe what astrology is, but maybe what this specific type of astrology and the practice of this and how that shows up and how you even discovered it in the first place.
I like to begin in a very grounded and simple way by asking people a question, which I hope they don't find insulting. Think how dumb you were 5 years ago compared to today. Occasionally people get defensive, but most of us, if we have the grace of humility, will realize we were dumber then, which means we're smarter now. Mm-hmm. We have evolved, we have learned. And I'm an evolutionary astrologer because evolution is a reality. It happens before our eyes. No one can really deny it. Some of us are evolving faster than others. There's people who spend their lives in front of the TV, but they're even learning something. And so evolution happens second by second by second. Conventional astrology tends to be very descriptive. You're a Scorpio, so you're sexy. You're a Gemini, so you talk too much, just the stupid side. But the worst part of it is the assumption of rigidity, the assumption that you have a personality profile. And in fact, your personality is a fluid thing. You're learning and growing. And if you have a little enthusiasm for the process, you'll learn and grow even more. Now, that's really the essence of it. My system quickly becomes rather metaphysical. You've learned a lot in the last 5 years, but you've learned a lot in the last 500 years too. And we typically use the language of reincarnation. And we feel that there is evidence in your birth chart of unresolved issues from prior lifetimes. We don't necessarily learn that your name was Suzanne and you ran a bar in Shakespearean England. We don't make that claim. But if your name was Suzanne and you ran a bar in Shakespearean England, so why did you sleep with that guy? Why did you make that mistake? And why are you inclined to make that mistake again in this lifetime? And how can you learn how to not do that? That's evolution.
So with evolutionary astrology, we are not just making the statement of this motif, this narrative could have existed. We're also trying to figure out why it existed in its origin.
Exactly. It's every astrologer and every school of thought will purport to answer the question, what does this chart mean? Or what does this configuration mean? That's astrology legitimately. What we evolutionary astrologers do is, in addition to that, we ask the question, why do you think you have this chart? What purpose does it serve?
And the answers that are being sought are not just pertaining to the conditions of this person's lifetime, but also the lifetimes that existed prior to this consciousness.
Exactly. And the assumption that there will be lifetimes after this one too. And they will go better if you've learned the lessons you need to learn in this lifetime. The analogy is so simple. If you flunk the 8th grade, you get to repeat it, but if you thought it was bad the first time, the second time will be even worse. So I just how to support I'll say souls in their evolution. That's really the most serious way of saying it. But I also want to make sure this is understood to be practical. It's like this is a pathway to happiness and fulfillment. Nobody needs metaphysics to benefit from this kind of astrology. It's the language we use. But if something isn't working in your life, maybe you can figure that out and figure out a better way to live. And that's its own reward.
And I know that in evolutionary astrology, we're working a lot with the nodes, the north and the south node. So in your practice, how would you describe, and obviously we're also speaking in the midst of eclipse season here when we have a lot of nodal activity. So I guess it's a two-part question for you. One is, how would you describe the nodes in your practice? And then two, when we're in eclipse season and the nodes are getting extra activated, from an evolutionary standpoint, what does that look like on a collective level?
Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful astrologer in New York named Michael Luton, and he described the nodes of the moon in one sentence. It took me 350 pages of yesterday's sky Michael was able to do in one sentence. It's a metaphor based on Alcoholics Anonymous, and he says the south node is the bottle, and the north node is the meeting. Here's your habits, here's what's bad for you, and you know better, but you're doing it anyway. And here's the solution that requires effort, engagement, self-discipline, and a new vision for your life. South node, north node.
So do you see the south node as, because I know that there are certain practices of astrology that really see it as what you are running away from, that you like by no means want to be hanging out in the south node. You're more or less rejecting it. Do you see the south node as something that we are fully sort of turning our back away from and as we face the north node, or do you see the south node as something we're integrating into that access?
Yeah, I think it's a subtle question. I wouldn't I guess my first response would be, when it comes to running away from your south node, good luck. Yeah. Even if it were good advice, it's not very practical advice. Right. And the south node has good things in it. Like, for example, thinking of the present eclipse season, some Gemini energy. If you have a Gemini south node, you may have learned many language skills in a prior life, and language skills can be really useful. But you might have used those language skills to rationalize bad behavior, or to tell lies, or to manipulate people. Language skills themselves are not a bad thing, but they're not a good thing either. It's just a skill set. And with the south node, in practical terms, we do pay particular attention to the pitfalls that are connected with it. In the illustration I just used, there are some moral dimensions, like maybe you were too good of a talker in a prior life and you're able to avoid truth or intimacy. We could imagine a kid wakes up with screaming nightmares and got a Aries south node. And that could mean a lot of things, but one of the things it might have meant is that this kid died a decade ago in a firefight in Iraq, in a state of absolute horror, and he's still scared. It's the south node of the moon. It's really important to underscore that. And the moon is the emotional body, and so even thinking of reincarnation, we tend to, almost everybody will forget their past lives. Even if we believe in reincarnation, we don't remember much. Maybe have some images and impressions, but there's a level at which we remember our past lives perfectly. And that is the level of the heart. I love this line, I say it all the time, that the memories of the intellect, the Mercury memories, are fragile, and the trauma of death and rebirth erases them. Whereas the memories of the heart are robust enough to survive the trauma of death and rebirth. So that kid doesn't remember dying in the firefight in Iraq, but he does remember being really scared. And so his emotional body is conditioned with that.
I have a very interesting special relationship with the nodes because my sun is exactly conjunct my south node at 25 degrees Leo. To the degree in my 8th house. So the north node is at 25 degrees Aquarius in my 2nd house. And it's, you know, especially with it being in Leo, and then of course it being in the 8th house, it feels menacing. But then it also feels like my sun. And to me, it's like this, it is this sort of very poetic internal battle of, you know, I don't want to turn against my own vitality, but I also recognize the pitfalls that exist, that have to exist with this position, with this placement.
Yes, well, it's a rich territory. You do have to be true to the sun or you're just crazy. You know, that's pretty fundamental. You know what you feel like when the weather is gray and drizzly for 10 days, you know, we all get the blues. If you don't take care of the sun, that's what you feel like. So you've got to be an 8th house Leo, not that you can help it, but you've got to do that. And yet we recognize there would be some dangers connected with the sun on the South Node. I'm first and foremost a counselor. So before I go an inch further, I need to ask your permission. You know, can I discuss that node with you?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
You know why I had to ask.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the, first a bit of a caveat. I'm not looking at your whole chart. I'd be interested in aspects that are made to the South Node and to the ruler of the South Node, which in this case is the sun, and they're together. But the ruler of the South Node is often a second source of information, just as important as the South Node itself. So with all that said, and certain caveats about what I don't know, a classic meaning of the 8th house, probably the most traditional meaning of all, it's a house of death. And so prepare to giggle, and then we'll get really serious. It appears, Aliza, that in a prior life you died. I'm sorry.
What? No, don't say it ain't so. Say it ain't so.
I'm afraid astrological science.
No.
Listen, and so it sounds really funny. That's why I said prepare to laugh. But remember, formal definition of the South Node, unresolved issues from a prior life. And so death as an unresolved issue in a prior life. We can therefore rule out that this death that we are seeing indicated in your chart occurred at the tender age of 97 as you slipped away in your sleep in your family bed surrounded by people who loved you. When we see an 8th house South Node, a good place to start is the idea that the person was ripped from life. We're talking about death by accident or misadventure or death by violence. And so there is a traumatized dimension to that South Node. One of the reasons you're a deep person, one of the reasons you've been drawn to astrology is you're born with this wound, with this hurt that you needed to figure out. Now we have a Leo sun on that Leo South Node. Nature of the sun, everything revolves around it. The sun is the center of things. Leo is the lion, the king of the beasts. I don't know what gender you were, but queen of the beasts, it works pretty well too. And so this adds another important dimension that in this dramatic situation that involved your death, you were probably in a position of leadership or at least some kind of public symbolism. In one ugly scenario, they wanted to make an example out of you. You know, that's one possibility. There's a lot of drama and trauma in that South Node. Furthermore, I hope I'm not talking too much, but hey, it's you, so you're interested.
No, this is a treat for me. It's very rare that I have my chart, I mean, analyzed by anyone, but let alone by you is a true privilege.
Another paragraph then. So Leo the lion, Leo the king of the beasts, and in every society that's ever existed has tended to have some hierarchical elements, you know, that there are people in more privileged positions. Maybe they're born into them, maybe they earn them, but you know, there's people who are above others. Whatever we might think of that in terms of judgment, it's simply a fact. And Leo, the sign of the king, doesn't mean you were a king or a queen in a prior life, but that you were in a position of some public visibility, which lends some credence to the notion of them, whoever they were, wanting to make an example of you because of your star quality, shall we say. Now, of course, South Node, an excellent practical definition of it is it's just habit, karma. Karma is habit. And so look at you now. You're a star, Aliza. You're on TV. And it's, your face was so eloquent there. I say you're a star. Lots of people have a strong desire to become stars, and it's, the great American fantasy that will become a star. Your face was so eloquent with this, there's a been there and done that element to stardom for you, but there's also this element of like the last time you were a star, you got in trouble, you got hurt. And so this is the monster under the bed. Now, how do you cure it? You're getting a full reading here.
I know, I can't believe it. I am like, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to interrupt it.
Let me give, I got so excited about working with South Node material and I started to figure out how to do it. A few times I'd be doing a private session with somebody and I would forget about the North Node. I get so addicted to the South Node. It's like we leave them hanging by their fingernails from but there is a cure, there's a and so the North Node in the second house and in Aquarius, so much to see there. The mundane interpretation of the second house, money. This is the first thing you'll usually hear. And we'll soon see its meanings are far deeper than that. But let's start with money. Establishing financial security is part of your spiritual path. Now, there could be very formally, rigidly, judgmentally spiritual people who would think, well, it's money got to do with it. Money is the root of all evil and, all those kinds of perspectives. But see, you were profoundly insecure in a prior life, probably fatally so. And so to feel safe in this lifetime is critically important. Second house, well, money helps us feel safe. All the money in the world won't make us fully safe, of course. At a deeper level of safety, a sense of safety would derive from a feeling of self-confidence, like the idea that even if I didn't have any money, even if I lost my position in the world, I could improvise my survival somehow. I believe in myself. See, you were strong in a prior life, but you were brought down, you were shaken, and you've still got that wound. And so the regaining of confidence is critical here. Material security is part of it. Confidence in your skills. Skills are a huge part of the second house. Anything that makes you feel I have what it takes and I can deal with what happens. This is being recovered in this lifetime. That's the second house. Now, Aquarius, I'm talking as fast as I can here. Aquarius, this is about a kind of truthfulness, a kind of honesty with yourself as well as with other people. It's difficult to be born into privilege, as I think you were in a prior life, and not be seduced by that, not be tempted into playing the role that is expected of you in order to maintain the position. So I have to use a harsh word. There was probably a certain prideful hypocrisy in you in a prior life. I always like when I make a nasty remark like that to somebody, I like to point out evolution. Once again, you were even dumber in your past lives. And if that's not true, you're going the wrong direction.
Totally.
That's good news. That's good news. And so in this lifetime, it is critically important, it is critically helpful that you resolve to tell the truth.
It's so, I'm sorry to interrupt, Steven, but it's just so wild because that is what, that is the thesis of the book that I have that is coming out in September.
Excellent.
Is veracity. Yeah,
Oh,
is the
a new
practice of
book.
veracity. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And it's called This Is Your Destiny.
Excellent. There's a saying in the Course in Miracles from years ago, that we teach what we are learning.
Definitely. Absolutely.
And I'd be the first to admit it myself. And so there you are, teaching what you're learning. Absolute radical truthfulness. Aquarian energy. It's like, who are you that I should have to tell a lie?
Right.
I'm not going to give you that power. I just am what I am. I don't want to be mean. If you like me, that's great. If you don't like me, that's amusing.
Yeah, that is the Aquarius motto. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where you're going. That's where you're heading.
Well, it's quite interesting because I think that you will be amused by this, is that when I first started really to go deeper into astrology, I was starting an astrology dating app, which I know that you are consulting on one now. So this was in the year 2013. I was living in Los Angeles, and I went to an astrologer with my co-founder, and we were still, baby astrologers at that time. So this would have been I think it was her first reading too, but it was definitely, we were going to get this reading together. We we're going to have this like experience as two friends going to get our readings. And the astrologer started to read my chart and started to, because I have an 8th house stellium. So it's not just the sun and the south node, it's also Mercury, Venus, and Mars, addition to Juno, if you're using asteroids. So a lot of stuff is going on in there. And the astrologer started to talk about the financial trauma. And I have a lot of financial trauma. My parents had an extremely horrible divorce when I was very young. They were connected as artists, and their business, just was completely destroyed. In a very short amount of time, I went from having a pretty normal life to really, financially struggling. There are massive financial struggles when I was a child. And I had not reconciled those at all yet. And in fact, I had come out to LA at that time. I was working in contemporary art as a gallerist. So like lots of being around money. And I hadn't told anybody what I had come from. I hadn't told anybody that I grew up on food stamps or that I lived in government housing. Like that was not information that I was comfortable yet. And this astrologer was exposing this in front of the person I was supposed to be starting this business with. And I lost it. I lost my mind. I was like, stop saying it, like enough. Cause I hadn't even processed it. And we went and we got dinner after, and I was eating. And I remember I was like, I think I have to see a therapist. I think I need to see a therapist. And it was that started me into therapy. And it was also that got me deeper into astrology. So that sort of truth telling and that veracity and that calling to light the challenges that I was at that point, still had not known how to face, was the process of me not just healing myself, but learning who I was, becoming myself. Exactly. And and I also have the moon in the 2nd house. So
near the north node?
Yeah. Well, it's 19 degrees Pisces. So my moon, so they're not in orb, but they're both in Placidus. They're both hanging out in the same area.
Yeah. Gotcha. I'm a Placidus guy myself.
Oh yes, I love it. We're a rare breed these days.
It just seems to work the best for me. I'm open-minded, with other astrologers, but that's my technique. It's interesting in the story that you've just told, a kind of underlying principle that the unresolved karma, which we translate as habit, essentially, has a tendency to repeat. My favorite line is that it leaves its fingerprints on the present life. It's a little more subtle than it exactly repeats. But in your story, there was almost like a little death in your life.
Absolutely.
Everything fell apart, and echoing a time when you were in a lofty position, and then suddenly everything collapsed, probably fatally.
Yes, absolutely. And then until this moment, until the reconciliation of that. And then there was still even one more, because then this astrology business that I had failed, and I still had no money. But at that time, I had the humility and I had the grace to accept it. And I picked myself up again, started over again. And this would have been, I think, the fourth time that I was like, and I hadn't even had my Saturn return yet. And it was on the other side of the Saturn return that finally things started to come together. And I started to be able to provide for myself. Yes. And be able to build a life that I felt was truly aligned with what my soul wanted, based on the healing that I needed to face, which was that if I had continued to not really learn how to talk about it, to accept it, to tell the truth, I knew that I was heading for death, and not to be dramatic, but it was really dark. It was it was just self-destructing energy. So this was it was like my medicine, but it was also honoring the sun at the same time.
I can't help but, with some irony, say you've had many blessings, Aliza.
I have. I really have.
The losses and picking yourself up, and loss and then picking yourself up. It's that second house north node. As you were through these traumas, you were learning, I'm a person who can lose everything and bounce back. I have what it takes. So almost you're illustrating the words I was using a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I have always been drawn to evolutionary astrology because I think that it really unlocks a lot of my chart, and it unlocks a lot of I love anything that's very poetic. And what I love about evolutionary astrology is the poetry of it. And I love the ability to suspend disbelief in order to allow for different layers of healing to come through. Because I do think that if we are limited to just the reality that we understand, we don't have the full access to what we are capable of achieving.
Amen. Amen. We look like these three-dimensional monkeys,
Yes, totally. Yeah. So I want to ask you a question. I'm actually going to spice up the order a little bit here, but I would like to ask you, how does magic show up in your life?
Almost daily, seriously. When you start looking for it, it's there wherever you look. I knew that nominally Mercury was going to be our subject, but of course, who knows where we wind up? And I'm happy to just follow the winding path. But I was just thinking about Mercury, and there was Carl Gustav Jung.
Of course. If he's coming into the podcast, we're going to get listeners.
Yeah, I wish we could 65 or something. But at any rate, he had a student who passed away recently named Robert A. Johnson, who sold 2.5 million books. He's a famous Jungian scholar. And I met him through magic. I've got to keep the story within bounds, but a knock came on my door of a friend who told me Robert A. Johnson had a house here in Borrego Springs. I said, the Robert A. Johnson? Well, that's amazing. So I learned he was here. And then about 3 weeks later, a client of mine who was a Jungian analyst mentioned that he had a friend named Robert who also lived in Borrego Springs. And I said, Robert A. Johnson? And he said, yes. And it was through those two synchronistic miracles that it was arranged that I would meet Robert. And we became dear friends for the last few years of his life. He died a couple of years ago, age 97. And the astrological, there are many astrological connections, but progressed Mercury was like 40 minutes of arc away from a perfect sextile to my Venus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there was through Mercury, the mystical side of Mercury. A lot of people make it much more heady than it needs to be, but Mercury is about reading omens. It's about synchronicity. It's paying attention to what Robert would call the slender threads, which we need to keep pulling. The synchronicity grid would be another way of saying it. And so at any rate, there was Mercury linked to my Venus through this happy aspect. And I pulled the slender threads that led me into an important friendship. I would also say, I'm probably being too windy about this story, but back to the nodes for a moment. The transiting north node, the day I met Robert, was in exactly an alignment with my sun to the minute, 15 degrees, 43 minutes of Capricorn on the day I met him, my sun and the north node position.
Oh, wow. That is phenomenal.
Magic.
Yes. I have a little expression that I say tank, which means there are no coincidences.
Yeah.
And I find that to be, sometimes that's the only way to describe it. It's like, how could that have happened? How could the alignment be such? How could it be? Tank, it just is. It's tank.
I'm with you. We think alike.
But I would say that also tank for me is our episode sort of loosely centering, or at least thematically bringing us back to the concept of Mercury, even though, let's be honest, the nodes are really the theme of today's episode. But our subtitle is Mercury, and it's tank to have you on and to talk about the mystical side of Mercury, because I have a Virgo in Mercury, so I have a very, very happy Mercury. Yeah. But even my Virgo in Mercury sometimes forgets the role that Mercury had in mythology, which is not just about the instruction of doing something, but it is also about making the decisions of who lives, who dies, right? Who is going down the river. If someone is going down the river Styx and it's not the right person, Mercury is going to turn the boat around and say, okay, we got to get you out of here. This is not the right situation. So Mercury has a lot more autonomy and agency than I often think is presented in our, mundane pop astrology.
Yeah, exactly. I'm totally with you about that. A bit of a pulpit that I like to assume sometimes is I keep waiting for the Roman Empire to fall. I wish it would. So we astrologers, we're the last remnant of people still worshiping the Roman gods, basically.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And which are very much the same as the Greek gods with different names. And so that Greco-Roman mythology is wonderful and powerful, and it's a treasure of human wisdom, but it is not the only mythology in the world. And it misses some things that are important. Mercury, case in point, just heading a little bit north, heading up into the forests of old Northern Europe. And they worship a god named Woden or Odin, depending on which culture we're in. And see if you can detect some Mercury symbolism in this. He allowed himself to be blinded and tied to Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days, basically kind of crucified and blinded. He agreed to this, and the prize that made that suffering worthwhile was the runes, the alphabet. I mean, there's a guy who loved to read. Doesn't that sound like a Mercury signature? And so in those northern cultures, the runes were an alphabet, just like our ABCD, is an alphabet. But there were also, like tarot cards, they were a divinatory method. And so this Mercury signature god called Odin or Woden was basically willing to suffer enormously in order to develop, access a technology of divination. And you don't get much of that in the sort of Greco-Roman take on Mercury, which tends to be more cognitive, mental, logical, rational. Mercury is all that, but it also has this ability to read the signs and the omens, to read symbols. And that's where Mercury gets really interesting to me, where it's mystical, magical.
Yes. And I think that, going back to classical antiquity, the Mercury staff has always been really fascinating. The staff with the two snakes, and which has obviously been adopted by ambulances and hospitals. And it is it is both the creator and the destroyer in these different situations, just as words and language can be too.
Yes. I've always read the snake, the caduceus. I'm not sure if there's any academic basis for it, but what it's always meant to me is the intertwining of body and call it mind or spirit, and that we cannot understand health, which is the medical expression of the caduceus, without recognizing how interactive those two things are.
Right, which is actually one of the main Gnostic principles, is always that duality of, the worm and the lion's head, that symbol of, what is it, Janobis? Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I would love to pull a card for you while we're on this, because I think that speaking to this, this is not even me now tapping into my moon in Pisces. This is me fully in Mercury and Virgo, who's going to be able to divinate through the card. So Steven, do you have a question, or is there something that you would be curious about that a single card pull would be able to provide insight on?
The first question that comes to me, I'm 72 and I'm working harder than I've ever worked in my life, and I love what I'm doing, but I wonder if I will ever get a rest.
Wow. Okay, let's see. So do we want to ask, how should you take a rest? What does rest mean for you? Or what do you think the heart of it is?
I think the heart of it is that the human part of me would like to. I never want to retire. I love the work that I do. I used to say, would the Pope retire? And then a Pope did. So
so there goes that.
So I should be clear about that. But I do work very long hours, and I would like to have more time to travel and just sort of enjoy myself in a human way. But I'm sort of spiritually confused about the right balance of the sense of mission and duty that goes with it, that is so precious in my life, versus do I get to be human?
Yes, I mean, I'm a Capricorn rising, and I know you're a Capricorn sun, and time, right, for us is just this impossible container. Because we are so aware of the passage of time and time running out. And astrologer is all we care about, is time and tracking time. Exactly. And astrology and the planets never stop. So how do we stop when the planets don't, if our job is to translate that motion?
Really?
I understand.
You have most of your work still ahead.
I know, I'm exhausted already.
To see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I'm exhausted. So this is not just for you. This is for all of us astrologers who need to also, we're not just sand dials and sand clocks here, So let's see, let's ask this. What is an invitation for Steven to be able to find a little bit more balance, so that everything works in flow in such a way that you won't feel like you need to compromise the hard work and the important service that you're offering, but you can still enjoy your life, enjoy Borrego Springs and wherever you want to go. And you don't feel like you have to be glued and become sort of like in servitude to the work. Does that sound good?
That sounds good.
Okay. Let's see. Three of Cups. Beautiful. So what this says to me is that you absolutely need to be hanging out more than you are, and hanging out with lovely people and just having fun, enjoying the magic of the summertime, and make a point to do that. To make a point to schedule that time to just be around peers, to have a cocktail, to just to disconnect from all of the stress and the hard work and the responsibilities and the money and the planning. And I know that Ricky was just on here, so I know how hard you guys have been working on Leela. Yes. So I could imagine that really just taking a break from all of it to just enjoy is actually really what the doctor ordered here. And I think is actually going to benefit your work as well.
I hope so. It's
Yes.
right now the Leela, heyleela.com, it's total tiger by the tail, and I've written essentially all the material for that, and there's more to be written. We're going to do a soft launch at the end of this month, so that's I bye everybody. I'm going on a cruise for 6 weeks. I don't think would fly. And then at the same time, I've also been the last 2 years creating a school, an online school of astrology. Forrestastrology.center, would be the website, and it's I've done like 190 instructional videos
Oh my
and
goodness.
counting. It's been a huge project to build this mechanism, and my aim has been to build a school that could exist even after I'm gone or I lose my marbles or something like that. And so we have already a lot of students, even though we haven't advertised it very much, and a team of teachers and material that kind of stands on its own 2 feet. But we're still building it, and so every day there's something to be done. But the way I could line up what I'm saying, these requirements in my life, with the message of the Three of Cups, is that both Leela and my school, I can see a time not too far away when those things are built. And that's when I think the door is going to open for me. When, I don't know, a year, maybe, something like that. That's kind
But
of
even still, the way that I asked that question and the card that I got says this needs to be integrated into your life today. Now, this is a very present, it's a low card. It is a 3 card. It is something that is tangible. It is something that is current. It is a current reality. So even now, going into your calendar and saying, okay, if I need to Capricorn Sun style this and say I'm scheduling downtime, so be it. But the downtime is essential. The peer time, the being present, the relaxing, the decompressing, social time is important for you based on this poll.
Now, the gods may be cooperating with you in this one and working against me, of course, with my workaholism.
Of course, you're a Capricorn Sun. They're always working against you.
In 2 weeks, on the 18th of June, my sweetheart Michelle and I will drive to her place in New Orleans. And
oh, wow.
We'll spend 6 weeks in New Orleans, and she needs to go there. She's a portrait artist and has to do some photographs. And I'm planning to work on another book when I'm there, but it's too noisy for me to record readings or videos or anything like that. It's, the recordings are always ruined by motorcycles and jets and things like that. So
yes, Borrego Springs is hard. That's like a very specific kind of quiet. That is an unusual type of quiet.
It's so precious. I like cities. Cities are fun, but when I go to a city lately, I'm so struck by how noisy they are. I mean, I grew up just outside of New York City, so I didn't realize it was just life. It wasn't noise. It was how life was, until I moved out here and realized it's quiet.
I know. And the space to think, it's incredible.
Yeah. It's good for the soul.
I think so too.
Yeah.
My next question for you, and I'm sorry to say my last question, is what do you believe in?
The meaningfulness of life and the continuity of consciousness beyond the phenomenon we call death. That mind has existed since the beginning of the universe, whatever that means, and is indestructible. And the evolution of our consciousness is the purpose of life, whether we like it or not. We flunk the 8th grade, we can repeat the 8th grade, but better to get on with it. And so, not to lose our sense of humor, but to take life seriously. Life is a precious opportunity. Life is stressful because learning is stressful. To live without stress would be to live without evolution, live without growth, which, as I think about it, would be very stressful.
Absolutely.
It's paradoxical. rather quickly, because feelings of emptiness and purposelessness are extremely stressful and they erode the soul. So I'm not exactly talking in a circle. So those are my beliefs in a nutshell.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been so incredibly delightful and so profoundly inspiring. And it's a real privilege to have you on. And thank you so much for considering my very interesting nodal signature in my chart and for your words on it. It's more meaningful to me than I could even possibly express through my Mercury right now. But where can our listeners find you and connect with you and continue to follow along with your work?
Well, two places. My website, Forrest, 2 R's in Forrest, just like a woods, but with an extra R. Forrest Astrology, one word, forrestastrology.com. So that's all my events and new books and things like that are up there. And then my school, forrestastrology.center. That's a good way to keep up with me. And then heyleela.com. There's a lot of Steven Forrest face up there too. So those 3 places. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. And thank you for having me, Aliza.